What constitutes a healthy diet? This is a very common question that is asked by many, and some people do not actually think about this. But I thought it was an opportunity to discuss with you guys and see how much one can help people who are asking this very relevant question. It is not uncommon that people are eating, but what they're eating, whether that is of any significant help to them nutritionally, is a factor that has eluded many. I think that we're really eating for those of us who are eating and are finding out that they are well or not well, and they might be guessing appropriately whether or not what they're eating is helping them or not. So I think we should concentrate our efforts a bit about what constitutes a healthy diet. When we were born, we were eating, of course, most of us drank our mother's breast milk. And then we started as toddlers eating whatever was locally produced and given to us based on the knowledge of those who fed us. And then we grew up in a community where there is food and we ate whatever we found. And whether those were based on the abilities of the people who fed us or gave us access to those food items as knowledge, or was based on the fact that they knew something, or by the amount of funds they had on how much they could purchase. And so these were factors really that predetermined things. And then our test buds became trained by certain of our what we've been eating, and thus we became stuck. And if we were eating lots of carbohydrates, then that continued to be our staple foods and we did not change. And of course, we only start reaping the problems of whether we had eaten healthy or not eaten healthy. And so, but what constitutes a healthy diet? Let's go on to the lecture really right away. Right. So we talk about the contents, the quantity, and the quality. Do not go away. This is basically going to be as simple as possible. I will avoid medical jargons and measurements as much as possible. I do know there are people who are watching who may actually want more specifics, especially talking about caloric intakes and so on. But this is a very simple way which is applicable globally, so that you do not really need to be intelligent to know what I will be speaking about here. So just follow on and see. All right. Right, the constituents of a healthy diet. This is the first one, starting with the contents. Right, so a healthy, high fiber, starchy food such as potatoes, bread, rice, or pasta. Some people take yams and so on. Most foods have these large amounts of starchy foods, but that a healthy diet should contain something like that. Of course, we'll talk about quantity and quality later. And the second bit will be proteins. It should contain protein. And there are many sources, animal as well as plant proteins. Of course, we've got beans, pulses as plant proteins, and then fish, eggs, and meat as animal proteins. Of course, we will talk about that again at some point. Now, the next one would be small amounts of unsaturated fatty acids and oils and spreads. Obviously, a lot of oils are available, but some of them are saturated and they can actually contribute to the problem of cholesterol. And that will not be really very helpful for the heart and many metabolic activities. And so be careful about the kinds of oils and spreads you apply or take in. The other bit would be portions of fruit and vegetables. Five a day is a big campaign in the Western country, meaning that you should have five portions of fruit and vegetables. That is very healthy as they supply many nutrients and minerals. We again go on to dairy products. Obviously, a meal should have a little bit of that, really, unless you're lactose intolerant, in which case there are alternative sources of dairy products and milk which you can take. Again, water is not something to compromise. Drink adequate amounts of water. Our bodies contain 60% of water, and many times we ignore it, in which case We then produce water from the food we eat. Sometimes it is inadequate, and then we end up having problems with dehydration and kidney dysfunction and stone formation as well. And so pay attention to drinking adequate amounts of water. Right, so let's jump on to quantity. What quantity is enough and not too much or not too little? Like I told you, I'm going to be escaping from the responsibility of taking measurements. But let's go on to carbohydrates. That starchy carbohydrate should form not more than, now remember I said not more than because sometimes this actually forms 100% or even 90% of food constituents by many people. Now, it should not be more than a third of your plate. That should be the rule. In other words, a standard plate is not a very big plate. It should not mount up, such as the big yam, pounded yam, or some kind of cassava that would fill up the whole plate with a little bit of oil. No, that's not the way to go. If you want to live and eat healthily, carbohydrates should form just less than a third of your plate. Fruits and vegetables should always be present. A colorful plate is always a healthy plate. Often, sorry, let me put it often, but it should be colorful with lots of vegetables, greens in particular. And then oily fish. If you have access to fish, unless you have problems with seafoods, then go for some other sources of meat and or eggs. That should form a portion of your protein intake, and that will help support your fatty acids as well, particularly the unsaturated fatty acids. Right, water should not be ignored. I did talk about this earlier, and this is an important component of your intake, and that will help you uh, actually maintain a very healthy balance in your food, and then obviously your body weight as well. Right, so let's go on to quality. There are many things, there are many do's, but we will limit ourselves to the don'ts. Okay? Do not skip breakfast. This is the problem. If you are used to skipping breakfast, what that means is that you have actually starved yourself of food for about 8 hours or more. And then you will, when you skip breakfast, mid morning, you become extremely hungry to near hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. And at that point, you then start binging, eating, and the wrong things. And that means then you alter the way your body takes in nutrients and metabolize them. And that builds up in the wrong way. And some of the foods will then be processed and stored as bad fat. So breakfast intake is a healthy habit, which then ensures a smooth running of the metabolism and which is quite healthy for you. Do not get thirsty. I must say here that the signal for thirst is often confused with hunger. And so if you feel hungry, as it were, go for a drink first. And that drink should just be water. And if that quenches the hunger, then you can as well assume that you were actually thirsty. And that way you save yourself lots of caloric intake, which will contribute to obesity and problems down the line. The last point, but not the least, is sugars, soda, so-called soft drinks, and salt. Avoid them if you can. This is very important. Sometimes your taste buds might revolt and you would want to go back to them. But I bet you within a week, your taste buds would be retrained to accept that you're doing what you're doing is not wrong. And you can then start enjoying life. And I bet you will see how you will become much more mentally alert and also control any metabolic problems such as diabetes and high blood pressure. Thank you very much. And I hope you subscribe to this channel and see you again at another episode. Bye bye.